I would like to introduce Andrew Notbolm.
Right.
And he was the one that I worked with this past summer on the chipper program in Pinecliff. He's a wildfire mitigation program coordinator for the Colorado Springs Fire Department, and he's been in that position since 2008. Before he joined the fire department, he successfully owned and operated a private forestry company in El Paso County that specialized in fuels management and defensible space. Mr. Notbolm is a ISA certified arborist and a red card qualified wildland firefighter. So without further ado.
I may try, can people hear me in the back? Can I speak real loud? Okay. I'm going to try. I move quite a bit, so I'm going to try to go without this. A little bit, thanks for coming out. This is a great turnout. A little bit of my background. I'm familiar with the Pinecliff area. Bruce mentioned it before. I started with the Colorado Springs Fire Department. I was a contractor. I did your first community chipping as a group called Fire Ready. And so I've worked with this neighborhood. And here to talk a little bit about our program and sharing the responsibility, what that means here in Colorado Springs. I like to start and talk about a little bit of a story. You need to look at the history here of fire in Colorado and fire in the environment, okay? Fire is a natural part of the ecosystem. 100 years ago, the forested areas in Colorado Springs were drastically different than they are today. Why? Because fire was the regulator, okay? We lived in what we call a mixed severity regime, meaning we had frequent fires historically. Every 15 to 30 years, low-intensity wildfires coming through, clearing out underbrush, okay? Occasionally then we would have a bigger fire come through. For 100 years, firefighters, land use practices, they've changed how fire and fire's role in the environment. So for 100 years, we've suppressed fire, we've had more growth, we've moved into the wildland-urban interface. The wildland-urban interface are where homes meet, forested areas, and we have a real problem. Okay, but this is a problem because we've moved in to the forested areas and we've changed how fire acts in the environment. I really like this photo here. You can see there have been a couple of these more recently that kind of show before and after 100 years. When fire was able to go through, it would clear out a lot of that underbrush. We have a history even before this summer of wildfires here in Colorado Springs. Big burn of 1854. This right here is Colorado Springs, okay? This right here, this is Wilkerson Pass, okay? This fire ran all the way from south of Colorado Springs to Wilkerson Pass, okay? Massive, massive wildfire. This started, the tradition goes, there's a small pamphlet in our museum written about this event. There were Ute Indians, and they were doing some burning to open up game routes and trails. Okay, fire got out of hand, basically ran all the way to South Park. Okay, Camp Carson Fire, Cheyenne Mountain Fire of 1950. On occasion, I go to a meeting and somebody remembers that fire. Anybody in here? I don't want to age anybody, but you've ever seen that fire? Okay, 9 people died in that fire. 7 Camp Carson soldiers and a 14-year-old boy. Both of these fires happened in the month of January. Okay? So think about it. When is fire season here in Colorado Springs? You know, we think about it in the summer. Hey, it's 12 months out of the year. We have a dry winter. We have Chinook winds, strong winds. We have potential for active fire and extreme fire behavior. Waldo Canyon fire, right? Well, remember that. This is Mountain Shadows. This is our preliminary damage assessment. 345 homes destroyed. Another 47 that were damaged, or visibly damaged from the outside. Our initial findings. I'll talk more about this. You know, wildfire is going to ignite your home in one of 3 different ways. It's going to be a radiant heat transfer. It's going to be direct flame impingement, or it's going to be through spotting or firebrands embers, and I'll talk about this in a moment. A lot of what we saw in Mountain Shadows, we knew this, It's going to be through because of small vulnerable areas around your home, and so I'm going to suggest some things you can do to help reduce that risk. Exposures. Of this wildland fire here, okay, we have 345 homes. We have 180 lost between 2 streets. That was an urban conflagration. That was a building and land use development issue. Okay, homes were so close together that it moved from the vegetation to one home and then it went home to home. Okay, right now we're working with council and working with the community, trying to make some changes to our building code, helping to hopefully change some of that behavior if we're to see this, or when we're to see something like this again. A lot of the, mentioned this too, a lot of the homes in Mountain Shadows, they were top down because of the roof. So I mentioned the wildland-urban interface, the WUI, we call it. WUI is a big term in my field. WUI is anywhere where homes meet forested areas of natural vegetation. In the city of Colorado Springs, I would argue all day that we have the biggest WUI in the Intermountain West. Okay? It is north from Peregrine, the Air Force Academy, south all the way down to basically Fort Carson. It goes western boundary is the Pike National Forest, east to I-25, and then it even spills over here. UCCS, Pulpit Rock, Arendelle. Fuels, topography, natural vegetation. Okay? We have significant fire risk. Breakdown on that, 29,000 acres. It's 44 square miles. In that, we have 36,000 plus individual homes, residential structures. It's about a third of our population, under 100,000 people. That includes everybody in this room. Okay? One of the unique things we have and how our program started, about 10 years ago, we had a fire chief here in Colorado Springs that came from Oakland Hills. And they had a massive wildfire out there. And he lost one of his best friends and impacted their community. They lost several hundred people. He looked at our hillside and he said, you know what? One of the things that the community said to me after that happened is we didn't know. And he said, I never want to be in a position where somebody in that community comes up to me and goes, hey, we didn't know. So for 10 years we've been trying to work this problem, and it starts with the education and talking to homeowners and letting them know this is a risk and here's what you can do to help reduce your risk. And then we're here to help share that responsibility. You can go home tonight and you can look online if you go to csfd.springsgov.com, and you can search your individual home and look online and look at what your relative fire risk is. Okay? This is based on, and this has been out there for about 10 years. It's a parcel level ranking. Okay? It's based on 25 different characteristics that are weighted. There are only about 10 of which we can change. Okay, that's going to be your roofing material, your defensible space, your siding. Some you can't change. Some are GIS driven. You can't change your proximity to dangerous topography. Okay, topography and vegetation on topography is going to help influence how fire is going to behave. But many things you can do to change your risk. Also, too, of these 36,000 homes, you got to understand there's only a couple hundred, there's more than that, but there's, under 1,000 that are in the low category. We live in the wildland-urban interface because we love it. I love the wildland-urban interface. I'm a tree guy. I like my trees too. But it's a relative model of risk, okay? If you look at the Mountain Shadows neighborhood and you overlay this map on the homes lost there, some of them were of the lower risk. So it's important to understand this is not an operational model. This is a place to start a discussion. But under extreme fire behavior, anything can happen, and a wildfire is such a dynamic event that everybody lives with a certain amount of risk. But I'll argue, too, by going in and by making some of these changes to your vegetation, you can improve the health of your property, the vigor in the vegetation to leave, create usable space, and maintain privacy screening. I don't see a downside to doing work on your property. Or I'll make that argument. There's Pinecliff here, looking through, the general area that I pulled up. You know, the factors there, we can all look at it and go, what do we have? We have topography, we have natural vegetation, we have homes tightly together, we have a couple ways in and out, okay? On your way home tonight, would encourage you to go home a different way. You know, think about that. You probably go home in and out of your neighborhood the same way every time. You know, those are the kind of things challenge you to think about. Okay, what can you do to just be thinking about wildfire? All right. So here's kind of the meat of the discussion. Program has a couple of features. Who here has participated in our chipping program? Quickly. Very good. That's outstanding. I'll mention it because I get ice cream every time I mention it. But we're here to share the responsibility. That is our tagline. Okay. Participate in our community chipping. You need to do a couple of things. By attending this meeting tonight, you're eligible to participate in our community chipping event. We haven't scheduled it for next year as of right now, but in December we'll put out a mailer, get the information to your neighborhood champion about when we'll be in your neighborhood. If you cut and stack material according to our guidelines, we'll come and remove it free of charge. As you can imagine, it's a pretty hot topic right now. Say that because it is just the volume of participation is really through the roof. And so we're trying to figure out how we can still help service the number of communities and the action that we're seeing in the community. Also, though, this qualifies you for community chipping, but I highly, highly, highly recommend you have one of our staff come out and do an on-site consultation at your home. That's going to be a one-on-one consultation free of charge where we'll walk around your home, we'll look at the small vulnerable areas, what you can do to help reduce your risk. And, you know, we're not in an enforcement posture. We're not going to tell anybody what to do. If you have a big tree coming out of your deck and you say, Andrew, I want to keep that tree, I'm going to say, well, here's what I would do to help, you know, keep that tree and make other changes that will help improve, you know, the survivability of your home in the event of a wildfire. So the fire behavior triangle, we have heat, fuels, and oxygen. We think of, I don't have, usually I do trivia here, but think of the two types of heat sources or ignition sources out there. What would they be? Lightning would be one kind. Sure. In general, though, it's going to be human caused or natural. Okay? And so lightning around here is going to be the most common natural type we see. You know, occasionally there'll be, you hear about old coal seams or mines or something starting a fire. Lava. We don't have much lava around here. Historically we did, right? You know, I heard on the radio yesterday, Smokey says 9 out of 10 wildfires are human caused, right? So, you know, even the Waldo Canyon fire, we know it was human caused. We've known it was human caused for a long time. Why? Because we didn't have any lightning coming through that area during that period. Whether it was, you know, arson or not, who knows? Of these, what you can change is you can change the fuel, okay? You can change your building materials, your structure, what it's made of, and you can modify the vegetation around your home. I'm going to go to this one first. Big thing we talk about is the home ignition zone. Okay, there's been a lot of research on what the home ignition zone is around your home. Okay? Looking at the vegetation within that first 30 to 50 feet around your property and how you modify that. That said, the most vulnerable part of your home is your roof. Okay? And the mountain shadows out there, and I forgot to introduce Jay Houghton is with me in the back. He'll be answering some questions here. Jay is our chipping crew fuels tech. He's out there doing the chipping, has been for several years. He and I responded out to mountain shadows. We were in Cedar Heights the first night of this event, pretty much fought this fire nonstop. We were out in mountain shadows at about 5 o'clock on that Tuesday the 26th, and we're there till early the next morning. We saw so many homes come down top down because of hot embers flying, okay, on a cedar shake roof. A roof is the most vulnerable part of your home. And I know what we do usually. Sometimes after this, we'll get in, circle up and we'll pray for a hailstorm and, hope it comes in. For groups that have, cedar shakes, And I'm with you. I'll do that all day. It's one of those things too. We have our patterns here often. The weather, they come. It's too bad. Actually, you may be all right. It's closer to the mountains where, there's a little too much lift. It drops it right over the peak, and then it carries it a little bit further out east before they get all the big hail. So you may be right on that edge where you're getting some of that hail. But your building material is really important, okay? And then it's the vegetation around your home. You'd be surprised that a one-on-one on-site consultation, it's not necessarily the gamble oak or the big ponderosa pine. It is your big juniper, okay? Those ground junipers that are nasty, that were real popular in the 70s. And you plant them because they hold down soil, and then they grow up, and every kid in the neighborhood has a baseball in there, and every dog has a bone. Okay? They collect trash, and they collect newspapers, and they're receptive to embers. Okay? Flying embers, a blizzard of fire coming through. You remove that, and also too, that vegetation, those junipers, they contain oil and resins that burn very hot and volatile. Okay? So when you're thinking about what vegetation to choose, you go to our brochure, you look in it, there's a Firewise plant material list in there, but in general you want stuff that is leafy, has a higher water content, and isn't, doesn't have as much oil and resin in it. Also too, thinking about fire, what Jay and I saw out on the Waldo Canyon fire, those embers, and I think about that here too in Pinecliff, and I'm thinking about your neighborhood. I'm thinking about a wind-driven fire in Ute Valley Park, or this rock rim in open space, okay? And I'm thinking about 60-mile-per-hour winds pushing through the gamble oak. And I'm thinking about embers flying, okay? I'm thinking about some direct heat and some radiant heat and flames maybe bumping some homes, but I'm also thinking about embers. And I'm thinking about those right angles, the same place that, in the gullies on your roof and the nooks and crannies where the needles and leaves collect under your deck, that's the same place those embers are going to go. And under sustained wind, is there enough vegetation there to maintain and sustain combustion? Then it gets in your deck and then in your home. Under that type of event like we had in Waldo Canyon, there are 20 stations here in Colorado Springs. And let me tell you, the firefighters in the city of Colorado Springs are outstanding. But when our resources are stretched that thin and you have this major event, it's not going to be like when we have a home fire in Pinecliff and you have 3 engines out within 7 minutes. Okay, there's just not enough apparatus here in the city to do that. So you're looking at the vegetation, the right angles, the advantageous geometry we call it, your building material, your windows, okay? Do you have a big old juniper in front of an old window where it can actually crack the window? And so a lot of the recommendations we're making to City Council and Code right now will help beef up the material so the homes can sustain or better defend itself against a wildland fire. That's what I'm talking about. We have different, we've got brush right up next to the home. I didn't go out and take any of your pictures today. This is south of town. But we see this, okay? We have what we call ladder fuels. You have different sizes and classes. You can get into the juniper. Oftentimes with something like this, if you take out 1 or 2 of these, hey, maybe you'll be all right. You're breaking up some of that continuity. It's often with a tree like this, too. If you limb it up and there's just one ponderosa pine there, I'm not as concerned about the pine as I am the needle cast from the pine, okay? And what comes off of that, and that vegetation is available. So, compromise going, yeah, if you want to keep that, you just need to get up on your roof a couple times a year, clean that vegetation or the material out there. We talk a lot about arrangement and continuity in wildland fire, okay? And when I do projects in larger open spaces and parks, or when I think about wildland fire, and if I come out to your home and visit it, my recommendation is going to be a couple of things. It's going to reduce, I want to try to give you recommendations right around your home that's going to reduce the potential for embers to collect and sustain combustion. And then I also want to do make recommendations that are going to break up the continuity and the arrangement of your vegetation to modify fire behavior, okay? A couple of different kinds of fire. You know, there's a ground fire, there's a surface fire, and there's a running crown fire, okay? Running crown fire is what we had up in Waldo Canyon. We had continuous fuels, and when we have major events like that, they're generally driven by wind and weather, okay? When you have something of that size, as firefighters, there's not much we can do to go direct on that. We can't put a truck in front of that fire, okay? We're going indirect with our tactics. We're relying on dozers, relying on air support, relying, honestly, on a change in weather, okay? But if you're modifying some of the vegetation around your home, your parks, and your open space, you're breaking up that continuity, that fire doesn't have that ability to run quite the same. And so if it's not in the crown of the tree, and we say 1.5 to 3 times the height of vegetation, that's kind of what we, you know, I think in my head when I'm going flame lengths coming off of that. So if you're breaking up your vegetation around your home and you're keeping it on the forest floor, ground fire, surface fire, then we can go direct and we can be aggressive with our tactics. And so we're trying to think about fire and how you can modify your vegetation. I would argue this too. We talked about it earlier. 100 years ago, drastically different. We talk a lot about our western forest, beetles. What's the best way to defend against beetles? It's by improving the health and vigor of those remaining trees. How do you do that? You reduce competition for limited water resources. Okay? So by reducing some of the stems and the vegetation, clearing it out, you're allowing those trees to naturally defend against insects and disease. Okay? And so changing that, it's usable space. Ladder fuels, you know, that, so it's in a ponderosa pine, and I know there are a lot of ponderosa pine in Pinecliff, that's why it's called Pinecliff, and it's gorgeous. And I would never, like I said, I'm a tree guy, I know there's some beautiful character trees out there. The character of your neighborhood is why you're out there. And so it is really about looking at your neighborhood and going, how do we save that tree? You know, that would kind of be my thought going in there. And, you know, you want to reduce the vegetation underneath it. You put a plumb bob or a skirt around this tree. You want to reduce what we call ladder fuels, so fire can't get up in the crown of the tree. And you want to break up the vegetation in there. You know, this is it's not too far up the road, but I like this. It's kind of a similar type environment to what we have in Pinecliff. You got the hoodoos, the rock outcroppings, you have the big ponderosa pine, gambelo. It's not clear cutting. Don't recommend that, but it is changing, you know, the vegetation, the composition and the density of that vegetation in an attempt to modify fire behavior and improve forest health. Okay? So it is changing it significantly. And then again to the building materials, and could put in a ton of slides and talk about that and the new code changes. I don't want to necessarily go there right now because we'll talk about the vegetation, but look at that. Small, vulnerable areas where hot embers can ignite your home. There were lots of successes, too, during the Waldo Canyon fire. This is a homeowner up on Darien Way. Interestingly enough, I worked with this homeowner for several years. Prior, they participated in our community chipping event. They had replaced their deck, their landscaping. They had the rock underneath their deck. This is composite metal railing, so there's no area for embers to collect. The homeowner that I worked with sold this home in January of this year. Jay and I were up there. Jay was actually in this drive up on Darien on that Tuesday and Wednesday morning. I met with this homeowner when they were allowed back in, and I didn't know that the previous homeowner had sold it, and I went up and talked to him, engaged him. I was so excited because I was wondering if, because the previous homeowner had done so much work, if they had sold it. I really wanted to have a good example of the real estate agents getting on and selling it as a fire mitigation property. And she said, no, we knew, but it wasn't in the listing. And I was like, oh no, because I really believe that. You know, that is where we're going to get some real change. Because this area too, you know, you can see they modified the gambelo, they cleared out the gambelo here, kept this, the weeds and grasses. They did a really nice job there. It is also, it's defensible space. The homeowners were able to make, or the firefighters were able to make a stand because of this home. It was in a critical area in that neighborhood. We saw active fire runs up here. We actually, on this side, on Wednesday, that next day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, saw the fire coming up again from another side. But because of that, the building material and the modifications they had made, we were able to help defend that street. And it was a really neat success. A couple areas we've had a lot of, we had some neat things happen in communities like Cedar Heights, where we had done some mitigation work. A couple of things too, we had an area in there where we had a mitigation boundary where we'd gone in with some FEMA dollars and mitigated a common area. This is part mitigated, and this was not. There's a large dozer line right here. This is the only area we had a spotting fire inside the interior of what we call Solitude Park, and we were able to catch it. I want to make it real clear, and I made this clear to the Cedar Heights folks when I've talked to them too, our homes, and there's been a lot of good stuff on the news and it wasn't quite clear, the homes in Cedar Heights were not tested. We had active fire into Cedar Heights area, we certainly would have lost homes, especially under the fire behavior we saw on Tuesday. But the mitigation work we did here, and then you can also see right here, it's pretty distinct. This had all been cleared out of Gamble Oak. This is about 2 years previous that this project had been done, so we had that regen Gamble Oak. You know, you live in Pinecliff, if you cut down Gamble Oak, it comes back aggressively. It's something that it responds to disturbance, okay? And so, but this fire, and this is Saturday night, Sunday morning of the fire, under moderate fire behavior, the fire actually came in here, and I tell you what, it ran out of fuel. It did exactly what we were talking about, changing that makeup of that fuel. The fire was not able to make an active run in there. Just a little bit about the chipping. Really encourage everybody to participate in our community chipping program next year. Please sign up in advance so we have a good idea of how many people are going to be there. Mention this probably in January, February. January of this coming year, we will have a date. You can actually go online now to csfd.springsgov.com and sign up. Okay, we're on the honor system here where you can go in and it'll say, have you ever been to a meeting or had an on-site consultation, and you say yes, and it'll allow you to sign up. This qualifies you. It's not a substitute for the one-on-one. Really encourage you to do that. We do that 12 months out of the year, and it's 20 minutes of your time, and I think you'd just be really surprised. And I don't think I've ever had anybody, and we've had a lot of people do them that have been, you know if you have a cedar-shaped roof. And we're not trying to scare anybody. We're just going to talk about risk and what you can do. And again, I think it's going to be the small, vulnerable areas around your home within 10 to 15 feet that are going to be the biggest recommendations, and not telling you to cut down the big ponderosa pine. So you qualify by having the on-site or attending this meeting. What's acceptable? Any woody branches or limbs up to 9 inches in diameter. That's pretty good size. Okay. What do we ask? We ask that you stack them according to our guidelines. That's really important. And otherwise, you're going to get a door hanger, and we're going to be emailing each other back and forth. Stacking cut ends facing the road, 5 by 5 by 5 piles. Doesn't matter how many piles you have. You know, it's also good to have an on-site too, because there are some tight drives up in Pinecliff. If you have one of our staff out there, going to be able to say, yeah, we can get up there with our truck and chipper. Why do we do that? Say stacking according to our guidelines. This is in the old days when I was contracting out in Pinecliff. We saw a lot of those. I encourage you to talk to your neighbors. You see that pile? Go, you know what? You're going to get a door hanger. And you are. Because this pile right here, these could be the same piles. This maybe will take the guys an hour. It's a bird's nest. Same pile is going to take 15 minutes. So we're able to service more people. The more piles we're able, the better they're stacked. See that? I really like that pile. That's a big one. All right, talk a little bit about the packets you have inside, and I don't know, we've kind of been switching up cards, but I believe there's Amy Sylvester is a card in there, and she is the one to call to set up the on-site consultation. She's also been helping out with our community chipping. Jay will pass out some folders. Really good information in the folders if you're just paging through. Talks about the vegetation guidelines here in the city of Colorado Springs. Also has a pamphlet in there for Rocky Top Resource. If you're not familiar with Rocky Top Resource, it's a really good place off of Las Vegas on Saturday. They will take vegetation free of charge with a donation to Care and Share. Couple things too I'm not really going to get into at this meeting. Maybe we'll do it again next year. Let's talk a little bit about, we put on a whole presentation on evacuation planning and emergency planning tips. But really, there's good information inside your packet. Some really good things. One story, but it's a true story. Doing the evacuation planning presentation, we used to kind of split a couple up and, think about what you're going to bring and get them back together. And, the man goes, or the woman goes, the wedding album, and the man goes, the golf clubs. And I was like, you really need to work that one out. Because there's, it's going to be, you may not have but just a few minutes. There's a couple of scenarios. There's the standby, okay, that, hey, you're on pre-evacuation, and then it's time to go. When is it time to go? It's time to go when you see smoke, when you feel threatened. It's time to go when law enforcement or firefighters tell you to go, okay? It really is. But good information in there. I was thinking about it. That house up on, there was one area, and I only think of this, just a little small story. We often recommend that if you're on evacuation, you open up, unlatch your garage door, okay? And just in case firefighters would need to get in there. Well, sure enough, we're up on the Waldo Canyon fire, and there's a spot fire, and it's way away from, where the number of homes on the cedar shake roof. And I went to 10 houses up and down because we couldn't quite get an angle on it where we were at, and we didn't want to plug into a hydrant. Well, heck, if we had a small ladder, we could have gotten up on there and put it out. Well, in that case, we were able to go, and we found a way to get up there. But it went, boy, I've been talking about this for years, but that one made sense. And really, some of the stuff that's in there, it's because it's proven and because of experiences like we had on the Waldo Canyon fire that we say, if you have time and you're on pre-evacuation and you got your stuff in the car ready to go, you want to hook up your water hose. Okay, you don't necessarily want to turn on your sprinkler, but you want to have your hose there. I mean, many, many times. And so many firefighters where it didn't make sense to run back to the rig, well, we had spot fires everywhere, okay, due to embers, and you just grab the hose and you put it out. Okay, unlatching the garage door. That was just an example. Ran up and down, and finally they got to it. So there's really good information in there. I encourage you to look through that. Call if you have questions. The on-site consultation is very good. That is what I have here. I really appreciate your time. I don't know where we are at for time, but we can open it up. And did I run through?
We have time for a lot of questions.
Then I like it. Let's ask lots of questions. So. Cool.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So Pinecliff itself has some kind of score that's been assigned to our neighborhood, right, as far as its vulnerability?
So
and
it
then,
did. Oh, go ahead.
And then within Pinecliff, each house or each property also has its own individual assessment.
The unique thing. So one of the real issues that I see, and one of the problems we have is kind of. In wildland firefighting in the West, you hear a lot of this red zone, or what is the WUI? We'll get these big maps where we paint this big, section over Colorado Springs and call it the red zone. But what does that mean to you as a homeowner? So we do not score, different neighborhoods. I think on a relative, risk, Pinecliff has some things going for it, and some things, not going for it as far as wildland risk. Mountain Shadows, for example, was a community that, it was high because it was close to public lands and a lot of continuous fuel, but a lot of the homes that were lost were a fairly good building material, okay? And so Pinecliff, I would say, there's a little bit of, hardened structures with stucco. There are some cedar shakes in Pinecliff, right? We've got a fair share, especially up top, I know. And so, you know, but you have some open spaces like Ute Valley, got a lot of topography. So really it's about your home itself and then working with your neighbors. You know, when you talk about that home ignition zone, really if you talk to what we call the doctor, a guy by the name of Jack Cohen, and he talks about home ignition, the home ignition zone is 100 feet. I can't recommend 100 feet in the city of Colorado Springs because that's probably on your neighbor's property and your neighbor's neighbor's property.
Yeah.
Okay? So you need to work with your neighbors and your community to help do that work. Because it's not just, it's beyond your property. We suggest clearing 15 feet around or keeping that pretty darn void of vegetation or having plants that are recommended on our Firewise plant material list in your packet and having, you know, gravel or something there, but void of combustibles. You know, so I think that the CSFD.SpringsGov is a really good place to start. Real quick, too, mentioned it, you know, in just thinking about this, and again, that spotting in those embers, you know, they're going in through, we saw it in Mount Shadows, attic vents, out of bump out windows on stucco, okay, or where you have like the bay window, and it's not underneath. Underneath, it's not stucco. You know, that is wood exposure, okay. And if you had chips underneath there, potentially getting in the chips, skunking around, so it's embers either starting a surface fire around your home, and then getting into your juniper or underneath a bump out window in burning a home, or it was in, you know, a valley or through an attic vent and combusting on the interior of the home. But the CSFD.SpringsGov is a good place to start to look at your individual home list.
What about our gas grills?
You know, that's one of those things too, if you have time. Gas grills, the question was. You know, certainly if you have time, you know, and we'll talk about that at an on-site consultation, there's kind of, you know, what we call structure prep in the wildland firefighting world. You know, the homes in Mountain Shadows, Cedar Heights, where we had fire and we had time to go into structure prep, you know, firefighters are going to come in and they're going to remove grills and throw it out in the backyard or put it in the street, okay? You know, but you need to be thinking about that too. Honestly, the research, and you look at it, it's, you know, so you have your deck and you have your old wood pile stacked underneath your deck, or maybe even some lumber, okay? And then you have needles and leaves blowing in that same area. You know, if you're going to go out and start a campfire, what do you want? You want different sizes and classes of vegetation. They're kind of putting that together. Those embers and spotting too, and some of Jack Cohen's research, cushions on your deck furniture. You have Venat Hemberland in that, okay? And then igniting, you know, an area, if you have an eave, you want to close that, put on a soffit. You know, screens over attic vents, okay, to keep embers out of there. So, you know, yes, if you have time, you want to be able to pull any combustible material away from your home, including cushions that could be on furniture and gas grills. Yes?
How many of the Mountain Shadows fires were started on houses that were related to cedar decks? And, you know, I've talked to several deck companies and replacing the deck with composite. They don't replace the trusses underneath that are wood. So I guess it's a twofold question. I mean, were there fires ignited because of the deck? And what good does it do to go to composite if you're not going to replace the structure underneath?
It's a very good question, and I think it's some of our recommendations in the new code address that, but you know, your deck is only as good as it's built and what's underneath it too. You know, it's interesting, and there's a science to it, and even some of the composites that we have here in Colorado are different than the composites they have in the ratings in California, where they are in an enforcement posture. It's totally different makeup of the wood there. But it is too, if you have an open area on your deck and what you have underneath, you know, we recommend putting a gap between your deck and your home, for example, and then gravel underneath. Because if you have that, you know, totally connected and you have hot embers blowing at it, there's an area for it to combust, where if it's dropping below onto gravel or rock, what's going to do, it's going to burn out. And I know that sounds, you're going, really? I'm going, yeah, really? Really? You know, it's those angles and areas where you have an opportunity for embers and vegetation to collect and where they have fuel to combust. And so, yes, you know, I think the truss is underneath, but you need to have rock, or you need to have it on, you know, a concrete pillar, and how you change that up, and how you keep either embers from collecting, or have them, you know, where they're going to collect, it's on non-combustible surface. Yes, sir.
The heat of the Waldo Canyon fire was, I understand, very hot. You mentioned that to try to help mitigate the homes to have a better roof and better siding, but wasn't the heat so hot that it went in through the windows?
You know, it's interesting, and so there were some where it got hot enough on old windows to break the windows, and then get the interior of the home. But it's interesting, and the scientist just did a report on this, and he made a good point. The question is, can you actually have a radiant heat transfer into the interior of your home, okay, without a window breaking maybe? And you can have a window break under pressure and heat and then go in, but you're actually not going to see fire igniting or combusting the interior of the home. And he came up with a thought that came from, that idea and that thought came from the Cold War, and because nuclear radiation can do that and ignite the interior of the home. So we have that imagery of that happening, and it can happen under that heat or radiation, but with actually a fire from a forest, it's going to break that window first. The other thing that we saw too is with vinyl windows, it can get hot enough to melt the frame, and then fire can intrude on the interior of the home. We also saw that too with vinyl gutters, okay? Where vinyl gutters, it just melted because of heat, and it didn't ignite the home at the soffit, but it fell down in the juniper, got the juniper, and then the home. Yes?
In the fire, was there many houses the sides were caught on fire because of the radiation, just from radiation?
Yeah, yeah.
And how far, what was it from trees or, well, I guess,
Yeah.
what were the sources that caused that?
So in the best we know right now, and we've had several groups we've been, you know, because if you think about it historically, you know, here in Colorado, the Hayman fire, we lost 160 homes. The 4 Mile Canyon fire up in Boulder, they lost 180 homes. That was the most significant interface fire in the history of the state before this summer. Hyde Park, they lost 244 homes in 5 weeks. We lost 345 homes in 4 hours. Okay, so we had, the reason I mention that is we had a lot of people coming and looking. Embers started the 2 conflagrations because there wasn't a lot of vegetation. So on Courtney and Majestic, somehow embers got 1 home or 2 homes through attic vents, underneath decks that had combustibles underneath, junipers, and then we had a home-to-home conflagration. Vegetation did matter on some of the other homes in the areas where we had embers spotting over and landing in areas, and then fire running uphill through vegetation. And a lot of it was junipers. It was the bump-out windows. It was small surface fires, again, in chips around bump-out windows, and decks. We did see a lot of decks, and it was ember production from decks. Yeah, we did see, you know, and if you look at the hillside, there, you know, that firestorm came down basically all day. We had this huge convective column building. Imagine everybody here was out of their homes that day, right? Is that right? Did Pinecliff was evacuated? We had this convective column building and building and building, right? We've got heat and gases and embers collecting and collecting and going up in the atmosphere. And it's just, all of a sudden, it's just getting too heavy, okay? And we had some weather come in and sit on top, and it just lost its stability. And it came down and ran at 60 miles per hour, basically 3 different fingers into mountain shadows. And the embers in the firestorm, a lot of them, you know, this would have been a lot of green vegetation here, and this is from mountain shadows. But that was embers on the roof, burning top down. We saw a lot of top down. In these areas, it was probably embers in side attic vents, but then it was home to home. Again, these two areas where we had complete, total urban conflagration, those homes were a fairly hardened material, but they were really close together, okay? And those were embers. But up on this side, we had, basically we had active flame front coming down, wrapping into here. We had active flame front coming down through Flying W Ranch. Think about that, the old building materials in there, and basically funneling through those hogbacks and right into Majestic, okay? Some of these other areas, we had embers flying over into open spaces in here and making runs back at homes through vegetation, but most likely started because of embers and firebrands cast ember production from the fire front and then landing in areas and starting small spot fires.
You said cedar fencing there, can you comment?
Yeah, so in cedar fencing too, that was one of the things, it was a real surprise, you know, hundreds and hundreds of these beforehand, and we knew that in Majestic and Courtney and some of these areas that the real issue was, hey, we've got a few cedar shakes in here, but we have potential for a conflagration, you know, home-to-home type fire. And the same thing exists out in, you know, throughout the city, not just in the wildland urban interface. But we did see cedar fences, and then under winds, 60-mile-per-hour winds, you can imagine the ember production coming off a cedar fence on fire, okay? We've just got, I mean, it's just throwing off embers as it burns down. And, you know, if you have the winds, if you were the home behind that cedar fence and it's throwing off embers, you know, you had a lot of, you had some active fire making runs at you.
How big are those embers?
You know, all different sizes. Boy, and I heard some people, did anybody find embers in this area?
I found one about like that.
And two, you know, so there's a couple too, you know, we have long range spotting, you know, which some of that may have been actually from, you know, lofting earlier in the day, which can go 1 to 2 miles. But otherwise, you know, they can be, you know, that big, quarter size or even smaller. And I don't have a picture, it's not in this slideshow, but I have a small video from out there that I took. And it just shows, I mean, it's like a blizzard, you know, just of embers, you know, and some are bigger, but the bigger ones often are lofted, okay, through a convective kind of column. And the fire branding that we saw here was a lot of smaller type embers. Yes?
Did I hear you right? We are, if this is ever to happen again, we are supposed to unlock the garage door?
Yeah, that was just one, yeah.
And then where we did disconnect our propane tank, where are you supposed to put that?
You know, 15 to 20 feet away from the home. What I would probably do is just put it out front by the curb. And so that would just be a visual, so firefighters coming up and go, hey, I know that's there. You know, just some stuff there, you want to leave your lights on, okay? You know, leave your doors open, honestly. You know, firefighters to help that out.
You mean unlocked, not
Unlocked. I said that, you know, and I said that about a garage door one time, and unlatched. I got that right. You're correct. Thank you.
I spend a lot of time hiking and biking around Ute Valley Park. And
Yeah.
I've noticed that there's unbelievable quantities of dead gamble oak and dead pine trees and just fuel everywhere all throughout that thing. Who would you talk to if you wanted to organize a volunteer effort to have people go in and start calling some of that stuff out?
I think we had, yeah.
Actually, we are in the process of forming a Friends of Ute Valley Park to do those types of projects as well as a bunch of other things as well. We'll be talking about that later. But yeah, we hopefully will have a volunteer process and have work days and work with the city because they provide the liability insurance and the tools. And so we've been in contact with the city parks people, and we're really excited about being able to do some of that.
Brings up a good point too, and just a concept to be thinking of too, is lean, green, and clean in your vegetation, okay? And it is the dead and some of the down stuff, because that is available, okay? Part of what my job is I test fuel moistures in the city, or our group does throughout the year, to see what kind of, and based on the moisture level in both your live and dead fuels and vegetation, we can anticipate what type of fire behavior we would see if given the right conditions, okay? And so what's dead is available more often than what is alive. If we have dry vegetation on the ground, we have about 25, 30 days a year to drive home this point, where we have low relative humidity, we have seasonally high temperatures, and we have dry fuels and we have wind. If you have an ignition in one of those days, this could happen. We knew that. I mean, it was pretty extreme out there, and we had an ignition source, and then the fire, Waldo Canyon fire. We had extreme fire behavior. Generally, when we have these type of events and these major WUI events, wind is a common factor. Yes, go ahead.
Can you answer questions regarding the
Oh yes,
taxes?
in the packet. And it's been a while since I looked at that. It's really good. Thank you. So by doing mitigation work around your property, you are eligible for a $2,500 tax credit. And there is a website at the bottom where you can go on and look at the information there. Basically, the two questions I often get are, do we qualify? Yes, you qualify because you are in the wildland-urban interface. If you have us out for an on-site consultation, if you're spending that towards recommendations on vegetation, we'll give those recommendations. You can also replace your roof or your deck and use this as part of wildfire mitigation.
So we don't have to find this authorized community.
Wildfire protection plan, you are covered. We've got you covered there. The city has you covered. Yes.
I have kind of like two HOA mitigation questions and then one comment. On scheduling for the chipping, you guys usually have it so early in the spring that I don't know what's dead and what's going to bloom out for scrub oak. And I'm wondering if you could have like a midsummer when I know what's dead and I can clean that out from a Gamble oak, if that's a possibility. My other, probably this is HOA. I have a neighbor who has like a big dead ponderosa pine, 40 feet dead. And he's on top of a cliff. And he's in my backyard. And it's been like that for 5 years. And how do we get that removed?
Yeah. Two things are great questions, and hopefully, there's maybe some momentum that right now the schedule is so hard for us. We're so packed that it's hard to change it. And we have it set up regionally because I like to have the option if I get a phone call and, hey, we missed this pile, we're in Golden Hills next week, so I can run back and get it. Or if I'm in Broadmoor Bluffs, I'm too far away to get it. But we're looking at potentially having another chipping crew and offering, a switch for neighborhoods. For the, I can't answer for the HOA because there may be a covenant issue, but as far as vegetation, you're only able to cut what's on your property. And surprisingly, from a fire perspective, that dead tree, if it's a large dead tree, it probably doesn't pose as high a risk as you may think. It's one of those things. We were at a thing Senator Udall was giving this several years ago, and there was a big push to get funds up into the high country in the lodgepole pine, okay, because we're having all that beetle kill. And credit to him because, he's since changed his tune and understands that there's more money should be funded for the Front Range because up in the lodgepole pine, that is another fire regime. That's usually a stand replacing fire regime of high severity. Fire comes through every 300, 500, 600 years, wipes everything out like you had in Yellowstone. Now, when you have that dead on your tree, you have increased fire threat for 2 or 3 years, but then when the needles fall, it's not able to sustain a crown fire. So you actually lower your wildfire risk for about 20 years, and then those trees start to blow down. And then you get the Christmas tree farm coming up underneath, and then you have an issue again, okay? And so forests kind of work in funny ways. So I wish that, that may be a good wildlife tree, and there may be other reasons to get rid of that tree, but it's probably not as big of a fire concern or hazard. It may be a hazard falling on your property, which I totally get. Yeah, but fire risk, and I get that a lot, but it's not as much of a risk. The standing dead larger pines.
And then
Sorry.
my other
Yeah.
HOA question. So when we built our house, we were on a hillside preservation, and that meant that there were certain trees that you were not supposed to cut down, and they're extremely close to my house. Where one of actually permanently touching my house, but it's still a preservation tree. How do I get permission to get that?
Wildfire mitigation trumps preservation or hillside ordinance.
Okay.
Okay? And so in that 15 feet around your home, you can do whatever you want. You can remove anything. Beyond that, we ask that you maintain the natural character and you have somebody out and you talk about it. You're not allowed to clear cut. You're not allowed to remove vegetation for scenic views. In preservation areas, if you have preservation areas where it's your property but it's in what they call preservation, you're able to go in there and maintain that, remove dead, understory brush, and in general maintain it and do fire mitigation. But within 15 feet around your home, you can do what you like.
Do you want to talk about what it takes to become fire-wise, how we have to collect data, and then...
As a community?
Yes, as a community.
Okay, yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, and it's a great goal, because Pinecliff is not a fire-wise
Right,
community.
but we want to become one.
I love it. And Christina, my supervisor, she's the one who really handles the fire-wise community. But if we work as a group, and I think it's $1 basically per...
I think it's 2 per capita.
Gone out, but that's good. And we'll cover some of that too, because you're able to do our chipping event. But basically what we need is, we need participation. You know, we need to show that we're out there and getting material out of there.
So the people that participated in the chipper program this year, you're going to be getting an email from me asking you how many hours you put into preparing for the chipper program. We're going to collect that data. Also, any fire mitigation that you paid for out of your own pocket, we want to collect that data as well. And we have to meet $2 per household, or what's capita mean?
No, I think it's per household in the
Yeah,
community. Yes,
right.
yes.
So we'll be busy collecting that and giving it to Christina.
Yeah. And that's just a neat thing as a group. We have a question right here.
You said about chips. It's like wood, like mulching or
Yep.
wood chips or any
Mulching, wood chips, and again too, you know, there's a couple things. Chips are, you know, they help keep moisture. They're good, but just not within 8 to 10 feet of your home. Okay, so not right up next to the home, because they can, you know, they're not going to carry. You're not going to have big flame lengths off of it, but it can carry fire.
Is that the same thing with pine needles?
Yes.
Because we have a bunch of pine needles and we had it on site and wasn't very concerned about it, but it's a few feet, several feet back. So
And several feet back, again, you know, the one thing about pine needles is and it's like, you know, the bigger chips versus like that gorilla mulch that can blow, and you see that, you know, under those winds, you're going to see that stuff moving. But yeah, I really want to keep needles and leaves. I mean, because needles are a natural part of the environment, but you just want to keep them 8, 10 feet away from your home, and also bark mulch.
So I have a question about the area that adjoins Ute Valley Park to the east, that I believe is a preserve area that was set aside by the city of Colorado Springs years ago when digital first built back in that area. Who's responsible for maintaining that?
You know, and I think I know the area because, you know, it's funny, there are a lot of familiar faces in here, and I meet so many people, but I think I've been to a lot of your homes and have had this discussion with people in Pinecliff for years. There's some that's preservation and there's some park property. We do have some options. It takes some time to get funds to go and do this kind of work, but we've got some momentum to really take some action and go in there and apply for some grants. And one issue about Pinecliff too, and I just met with some folks, we don't want to mitigate one problem and create another, and a lot of the stuff around it's pretty steep.
Well, years ago, they would, when the weeds would get high, they would brush hog in there. I believe that was done by digital. I believe, I'm not sure, but for years now they haven't really done anything back there. And I was just curious if the property owner that owns that complex is still responsible, or you know.
Sure.
So we'll be contacting all the landowners who have property adjacent, including Hewlett Packard, to talk about those types of situations. And, you know, I can't promise anything, but
No, I understand.
we're going
I'm
to
just
establish
curious.
contact, see what their position is, encourage, and see what grants might be available that they could access.
One other quick thing about our program too is it's only possible, we work with close to 80 homeowners associations now, and there are about 3 of us that are full-time staff and some seasonal help, and so we're not able to do our jobs and get to you without our community champions here, people in your neighborhood, and I can say that I've talked to several people in Pinecliff and appreciate the efforts here of going, no, we've been engaged, but now that we have more interest, let's really engage and are doing good things. So, really support your community champions and those folks in your neighborhood that are taking this and working with the fire department. So that's good.
We have put together a game plan that'll be posted on our website in about a week, and we encourage anybody, whether you're in the HOA or not, to go on there, and if you have additional inputs or suggestions,
What's
feel
the
free
website?
to. Pinecliff-hoa.com.
And that,
And
sorry.
if you go there right now, you will see fire mitigation, but there's not much stuff on there. But we will be putting our game plan and proposals and engaging. It's all of Pinecliff. It's not an HOA thing. So we're just utilizing the website to help bring everybody together and get everybody on the same page.
Right. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, and I'll hang out for a little bit.